There's a bit of a crisis in podcasting right now. It's an identity crisis, and it's one that is strongly felt for those of us who've been working in this business for so long and have considered it to be primarily in a format that was literally defined by the way in which you consumed it. That is, the iPod, that thing that existed before the iPhone and before screens were part of the whole experience. It was for ears only. It was for music first, but your eyes were not in the picture, literally. And now the lines are blurring again big time. Podcasts are on Netflix. YouTube is the biggest podcast platform. And short form video clips are widely considered to be essential to podcast audience discovery. I am an unapologetic audio loyalist. And as anyone who's heard me talking the talk about this emergence of video in podcasting will tell you, I don't waste any time trotting out the statistics that show even when people are partaking of podcasts in video form, they're actually, by a large margin, listening most of the time, not watching. But today's conversation genuinely reshaped how I see this crossroads that podcasting is at right now. Hi, I'm Courtney Reimer, and this is Talking the Talk, a podcast about podcasting. Today's episode asks the provocative and yet all too familiar question, is video killing the audio star again? My guest today is a dear friend of many decades, beginning all the way back in our MTV radio days, and is an absolute powerhouse in the international podcast industry. Sasha Hamrogue is Group Digital Director at Onic, a network of radio stations across Ireland and Northern Ireland. Sasha has long been a passionate advocate for and trailblazer in podcasting, from hosting her own show to leading the development of the highly successful podcasting arm at what is now known as Onic. In this episode, Sasha and I talk about why video is essential to reaching an audience for your podcast, the psychological cost of being knee-deep in the numbers all the time, and where and with whom she sees video notching the most wins today. Here's my conversation with the wonderful Sasha Hamrogue. Sasha Hamrogue is here all the way from Ireland, and I feel very fortunate because this woman is beloved and award-winning and running at Onic, which is a new entity of a long, as I understand it, of a long established media entity in Ireland. Can you say more about that and what you do there?
So Onic is a group of 7 radio stations across the island of Ireland, including Northern Ireland. So I oversee digital strategy for all of those radio brands, but also I was very lucky a few years ago to grab hold of podcasting and see how radio could optimize that moment and see what we could do in the audio space in a different way. It's big, it's broad, and audio is so at the heart of everything we do.
You're speaking to my audiophile heart here. I'm on the record as someone who's a stick in the mud about the whole pivot to video thing, which we can get into a bit. But you and I have a similar trajectory in that, like, we come at audio through music and spoken word, but we love listening to things. Talk to me a little bit about where you feel like podcasting ends and the whole video thing begins. What's the difference between a YouTube show and a podcast? And how do we separate the two, or do we even need to?
So I think it's a really unbelievably hard question to answer right now. And I think the thing that's helped me a lot to challenge this question is you're basically making it available for different types of audiences. We're seeing some audiences really want to consume podcasts in a video format and have the time and space to spend watching a half hour show on YouTube, where other audiences, and I'm going to specifically get into the gender breakdown here because I think it's really interesting. Mm-hmm. For instance, in the sports area, what we're seeing is our YouTube views are flying, and what we're creating is podcasts, but specifically the visual element on YouTube is through the roof, because that male audience, especially that younger male audience, that's the platform where they are. So we're meeting them there. Whereas some of the other content that we're making, say something that's more around lifestyle for women in midlife, I mean, how many women do you know in midlife who are sitting down, putting their feet up and watching something on YouTube? Let's face it, we know our own experience. We're multitasking at all times. and how phenomenal is audio when it comes to multitasking. I mean, it's your companion, it's your friend, it's there to help you get through whatever you're doing, and you're always doing more than one thing. So I think the insights there have been great. And so it's helped us sort of see that yes, it's not one or the other. We know that video, when it comes to discovery, is vital. If you're trying to break through on socials, video is key. And even that journey of someone seeing a clip and maybe, being, you catch them and they're maybe interested in what the content is. You may be interested in who the guest is. You might be interested in what the host has to say. But unless that hook is so strong and the content is so good, that jump from social and from the social platforms over to the pod platforms is huge. So I think your game has to be very strong to be able to make that leap. But that's where video, I think, for us, certainly has become really vital in terms of reach. And discoverability has always been challenging in podcasting. It still is. It still is. And so I guess that's where like SEO optimization, in that space and try to make sure that you're able to be found, making sure that the title of your podcast is easily discovered. But then there's that layer of like, how are you going to find your audience? Where are they and how are you going to reach them? And video, I think, plays a big part in that right now.
It always warms my heart when I speak to someone and they validate a lot of the things that I'm saying. I mean, you and I have been doing this for a long time, but there's still that moment of, wait, am I right about this? Because what you're saying about discovery and just the numbers generally in podcasting are kind of opaque, right? And so I draw a lot of conclusions based on my many years of experience. And I know you have a lot of data that you work with, but most of all, I love that you answered this video question in a way that makes so much sense and that I know in my heart. But because I am that middle-aged woman who is audio first, I'm a little bit like, who the hell watches a podcast? And the answer is men and my children.
And I think that's it. I think it's not about catering to one audience. It's seeing how you can cater to lots of different audiences with the content that you're creating. And not all content deserves to be multi-platform. It doesn't have to be. I think there's still... So, I mean, if you think about something like narrative or true crime, the entire magic, if it was all visualized, I think the magic would really disappear. I think I've said this before on different things, so I'm going to repeat myself, but I think audio is the ultimate imagination vehicle. It is, if your brain, where your mind can go, where your imagination can take you through audio is like no other experience. So I think there's a time where video can actually really dampen the experience. So I think it's about really understanding the audience, really, really understanding where they are, where they play, what they enjoy, where they spend their time, and then thinking about how can you meet them there.
Well, first of all, to me, if a true crime podcast is video, this is where I come back to well, what is it then? Because to me, when a true crime podcast is video, it's a documentary, right? And it's a TV show, it's a movie. What you said, that should be your tagline, an imagination vehicle.
The audio is the ultimate imagination vehicle. I think it truly is. I mean, there's nothing like it. There's nothing else like it to help our minds explore. We all know the experience of listening to an audiobook and hearing the narrator who maybe wrote the book, and you're imagining their experiences, and it's unique to each one of us. I kind of remember it as far back as being a child reading the Babysitter's Club books. And that sense of imagination that can only really come from certain things like reading and audio. So I think it's very important to really consider how important audio is to people because it's very intimate.
Right. It is. And, I'm sure being in podcasting as long as you have, I think you've probably heard the term, the parasocial relationship that is developed between the listener and the host or the narrator, if you will. And that is more strong in audio than any other format. And I often cite this. When I was at Audible, they did a study with, I believe it was University College London. Does that even sound like a thing? It sounds redundant. But they did a study where they hooked up a bunch of wires to people's brains and watched how the synapses fired when they were listening to an audiobook versus when they were watching an action movie. And you would think like all the stuff that's happening during an action movie would cause, but guess what? The imagination vehicle,
Mm,
that happens in your brain. It's
yeah.
backed up by science. So what you're saying isn't
Mm,
just an idea, it's real. I mentioned that you're award
mm.
winning, things that you have made, things that you have executive produced and overseen have gotten all kinds of accolades and audiences, and that's not nothing. So I want to peek inside, if you don't mind sharing your industry secrets, what you look for when you're deciding yes or no on a show concept, or if somebody brings you a new idea. Is there a certain list of criteria? Is it about an existing audience they have? Tell me a little bit about it if it's not totally proprietary.
It's all of those. It's a lot of those things that you mentioned. My first response, though, was genuinely to say that there is an element of gut instinct about these types of projects and storytelling and what you feel might reach people. And I think that's because I think you probably would know this about me from knowing me professionally and personally. There is something very sort of visceral that happens when you kind of touch on something that you know is there's more to it. There's a bigger story there. There's something to unravel. There's something really something magical to it. And I don't mean to sound, whimsical when I say that. But beyond that, for me is it's layered. Obviously, I think people that have audience means that they have people who are already bought into them, who have a brand, people know them, and they are potentially more keen to try their other products and different avenues that they take. They're willing to go with them on that journey potentially. So you have an audience there. That's a bit of a safety to know that. But I think one of my favorite stories really was my first ever podcast producer that I hired. He'll expect me to be talking about him, as I'm always talking about him to some degree. He's gone on to do great things, but in his interview, he was a 25-year-old kid. He won't mind me saying that. Young man, a young man who sat in front of me for his interview, and we were asking him questions, and we asked him sort of what would be the podcast he would make. And this was early on. This isn't recent. So, and his response just floored me because his response was, I would make a wedding podcast. And I said, what? And he said, there's no wedding podcasts. When people are getting married, they get all in on weddings. They get in the planning. They want to know everything. They've never gotten married before. And they want to meet other people, understand what's good, what's not good, what to do, what not to do. And he wasn't planning on getting married at the time. This was so far out of his radar, but his instincts were so strong about a gap in the market and a need for something that wasn't there. And I have to say, we went on to make that podcast. It was a great success. We really enjoyed making it with the two. We worked with a wedding website, an established website that had existed that was doing really well. We worked with them. We worked with their editors. The editors became the hosts. They were brilliant. And we covered everything from the grief process, like how do you bring your loved ones into the wedding when they're no longer here, to trying to buy the dress. It wasn't our number one, it wasn't our chart-topping success, and it wasn't our award-winning. But I always use it as one of my favorite references because it was about that instinct and then insight. And the insight is always really, I think, very important when you're looking at things. So the other one is a simple litmus test that I tend to do, which is if you ask a room full of people, you bring up a subject to a room full of people and they start talking, it's pretty quick. You can tell pretty quickly. Like there's a chatter, there's something, and oftentimes you can feel something like a lead balloon. So if you mention like a true crime case, potentially, like in the past, there was, sadly a case in Ireland where a man went missing a long time ago, but it really captured the nation. And anytime you mention it, everyone starts talking about where they were and how they felt and seeing it on the news. And some things just have more to them and they're worth kind of getting deeper into the story and trying to do more with it. In terms of the other elements, I think you always look for is like curiosity. If you think about all your favorite hosts, like, what are they good at? Wanting to know more. What are they good at? The art of the question. And
Yeah.
also, I guess authenticity is always like You're always looking for the real where you can. That's a long answer.
No, I was thinking about topics, but you're also talking about the people who are telling the story or
Yeah.
doing the storytelling, and so much to tease out there. But what you said about both the wedding and how you greenlight a story that's a nonfiction story
Mm,
and people start talking, right?
mm.
Both of those things are hinging on data of some kind, but it's a
Yeah.
different kind of data. It's like gut data. It's, oh, you identified something that doesn't exist, and that is data. Even though it's
Mm.
not X number of people want
Yeah.
a wedding podcast, it's that doesn't exist. And then the gut data of, I'm noticing how people are, what the room feels like when I talk about this. And I love that merging of like gut
And
and
that's it.
data.
You're so right. Like data is a huge data is everything when it comes to once the pod is released, you're like devouring all the data. You know what I mean? Like you're trying to understand who, when, what time, are they sharing it with their friends, and it's watching it grow and grow and you're like knee deep in the numbers. But I think not everyone is going to go on that kind of like gut thing, but I think for me it's just a really important part of the process. When it comes to then putting it all together, that's a whole other layer to it that I think how do you make it a success and how do you reach the audience that you want to reach? And that I think that's where data really critically comes into play.
Yeah, you spoke about that leap between, yes, discovery on traditional podcast platforms is abysmal. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
abysmal.
no
Yeah.
secret. So you need that social element, but you can't always draw a line between somebody saw this Instagram reel or something and then went to the podcast.
No.
So how do you decide how it sounds like you don't have a one size fits all approach to finding an audience, but what goes into your ways in which you get the word out about a podcast?
So I think every time you launch something new into the world, you're jumping off a cliff and you're being vulnerable and you're trying something new and it's different every time, to be completely honest. For me, that's been the experience. But what you do is you take what you learned from X and you try to apply it to Y and you keep doing that. But I think consistency is, and there's people that will disagree with this. I fully recognize that. But at least for us, consistency is very important. There's an element of A/B testing for a period of time, potentially. So we may launch on a Thursday at 8 a.m. and we may do our research, get as much knowledge out there. Say at Thursday at 8 a.m. is the best time to release this particular type of pod, and we will bet on it and we'll release it. And if we're seeing that it's not doing what it needs to do, we will play around with it a little bit. Absolutely, we will. But once we find what works, we try to really apply consistency. So X amount of social clips per week, look and feel, really making sure that people kind of are starting to recognize that brand that you're introducing into the world. And so look and feel in terms of consistency, and then being very, very, very strategic about the content and the hook. So the hook for the social media clips is, I mean, look, and the thing is we all know the clickbait is just everywhere. It's everywhere, but if you're smart about it and you actually have something that people are going to want to know about the rest of, the finish the sentence or understand what they're trying to hold you, it can be very strong. We've all been there. The hope is that you deliver on it when they come and they listen or they watch.
So talking about clickbait reminded me of something I didn't even intend to ask you about, but I'm curious because it sounds like you have a ton of data and I'm interested to know whenever people talk to me about their podcast and what they're doing, and in addition to, do you know a good producer or editor? I always shout out, hey, producers and editors, hit me up. I have people
Yeah.
who want to work with you. Is how long should it be? And there's this
Mhm.
perception, just especially in people who are new to podcasting, because of the shortened attention span and because of TikTok, et cetera, that like shorter is better. And yet we see certain men led podcasts, which shall remain nameless, that go for hours.
I'm not a Dax Shepard pod fan of the Armchair Expert, but
I
I
was
do
thinking
listen.
of Joe Rogan. Joe
I
Rogan
thought,
goes for like 3 hours sometimes. Yeah.
but a less controversial route. Dax Shepard, I think the Armchair Expert is usually 2 hours and 15. Now their guests are like Cher and stuff, like Amanda Knox. These are people who you're just like, you want to talk to them for 2 hours. And so I get that. But people do listen, and people actually, like, once they're really committed, they'll break that up. I'm sure you would, right? If something's really
Yeah.
great, you'd break it up. So you'll listen to an hour on your commute one day, and you'll listen to an hour the following day when you're, putting the kids' clothes away or whatever. So I think that like I'm not a stickler for time at all. I think if the conversation's strong and people your audience is captivated, they're gonna spend a lot of time with it if they can. Have you ever been in a position, and sure you know I am, because you and I would oftentimes maybe be communicating during these moments, but if I go for a walk, like, all I want is more. I'm just like, "Oh, another episode." And that binging, I suppose, behavior that has dipped into our world, and now there's a behavior that's set there about kind of wanting to go all in on something quickly. That really exists in the pod space. People do I think short is absolutely applicable for that type of content, or maybe that type of storytelling, or it depends on the topic. But I don't know. I'm never afraid to go too long if I think it's worth it.
I agree. And I think what you said is people do, it can become a short thing for their use case. And the one that you mentioned a walk, the one I always talk about when I'm talking to people about how long is right. And of course, it's like however long it takes to
Mm,
tell that story for Amanda Knox to exhaust
yeah.
all of the things you want to know about her. But also for me, it's like a convenience utility mechanism. And what I mean by that is when I'm on a walk with my dog and I'm holding a poop bag and an
Mm,
episode ends, and then I'm like, and it doesn't queue up the next one, and they're fiddling with the dog and the poop. I want something that I can set and forget and listen to for a long time.
yeah.
And so I just think there's a set and setting type of thing and a time and yes, TikTok, we're going to keep scrolling because we're sitting passively or whatever. But like the experience of listening to a show is more often in a place where you don't have to you don't want to make another choice. You want to have already made the choice of what you're listening to.
And that's it. And I think you brought up something really great, which I actually haven't talked about too much, but I think is very important, which is transitions. I think the transition from one episode to the next is vital if you want to keep people. So that hook of like it ending, either is it ending on a is it if it's narrative, is it ending on a question, is it taking you to the next stage? Is it so strong, and then does it tee up the next week's guest? So if it's like something like a personality led thing and they've got guests, are they saying next week on the pod we've got, and you're right away, you're like, okay, I'm ready for next week's episode. That transition is so important to get right. And I think that's something that probably isn't talked about quite enough.
I think you're right. And I think it's something that a lot of the people that I work with are brand new to podcasting, and they think a podcast is hopping on
Mm,
a Zoom call, kind of like what we're on right now, except it's not Zoom, and recording a thing and then putting it out into the world. And it does take a little more effort to add on that, like what we would
mm,
call a wraparound in the old days, or like the top and the tail. And it could do so much for you to just think about, okay, what do I want? I am the host, right? I'm going off a bit of a tangent here, but this is a thing that I often say that I'm like kind of into lately because it's had a reaction, which is hosts often think that they are the host to their guests. Yes, I want you to have a good experience and not have to deal with all of the technical difficulties that we did at the start of this, but I'm actually the host to my audience. I am leading them
mm.
through this endeavor and this adventure, right? And I need to make sure I've had a good entry for them and a good closing or a good like path to the next one. And I think
Yeah.
that's what you're describing.
I think that's
Just
very
thought I'd
much
put that out there.
it is really good insight. But I also feel for the people who are asking how long should my podcast be. I really do feel for them because they really want to know. Like everyone, I can't tell you how many times someone has asked me that question, and I can't tell you how many times I've left them hanging and feeling, sure, I can tell you 35, 45 minutes. I can tell you 30 minutes. I can tell you 25 minutes, because it's just not a one size fits all answer, but it is probably one of the biggest questions that people want to know.
Yeah.
And then people also like music, like what is the whole experience? And I think we spend a lot of time choosing the royalty free music that we use to make sure that that it all comes together and that universe that you're making, because let's face it, if you do this
Mhm.
right, you're making community, you're making a space for people. It's a world. Because what for me is the great trajectory is I somehow discover the pod. I listen to it. I press subscribe. I go on Instagram. I find the podcast, the show page. I look through all the posts because I want to know. And then what about this and what about that? And that to me is you're bought in, and then you're part of the community. And then maybe you buy tickets to the live show. And then maybe you want to
Yeah.
that's it. That's where it starts to really come together. And it's much more than just 35 minutes of audio.
Yeah, and you want to just to take run with the music thing, and again, my
Mm.
obsession with the host is there to host the audience. I have to give a shout out to, I don't know if you've heard of Priya Parker, but she wrote this book called The Art of Gathering, and it's all about creating an experience. And I resisted the book for a long time because I was like, I hate throwing parties, I hate hosting. This book means nothing to me. But now that I have a community of people that I'm serving in learning how to make a great podcast. Okay, so going back to the music thing, I'm getting there. When you're throwing a party or gathering,
Yeah.
music is such an important consideration, right?
Mhm.
It sets the mood. And so you should think about your podcast as like an event that you're inviting someone
Yeah.
to, and you want them to have their attention there and feel at home and get the feeling that you're trying to create.
Definitely. And it's definitely identity and making that whole world. People would argue maybe the artwork as well. How important is that? Well, when it comes to discoverability and maybe people landing there, it actually is quite important. Really thinking that through. And I've spent much more time on that than I thought I would ever spend. But to be honest, that has obviously become a really key part, especially because we're
Mm.
fully visualized at Onic. So all of our pods are fully visualized. So we really the look and feel and sound, the whole world of the pod is really important to get that right. And we spend a lot of time on it. Once you get it and once you're there, it's easier to kind of go from there. But I think it is a lot more than just, there's a great amount of work that goes into making these what they are. But like you said, you're inviting people in. It also makes me think of from our experience of working at MTV, somebody like Kurt Loder, when you think about a person that's bringing you along, really an amazing, if you think about some of the interviews he did over the years, especially with Madonna, and how he was able to
Yes.
take you in this way. It wasn't about him, although somehow you knew you could not ignore that it was him, but he was able to take you through these questions with these people in such a way that you were just so bought into the world he was creating and the way that he was taking you through the conversation. So to me, that art is it's timeless. It's not about podcasting. That's the art.
You've said so much, but I think the thing is, it's super relevant. I want to start with the look and feel thing because that it kind of brings us full circle back to the whole video question and the visual element of what I consider an audio thing, but is increasingly a visual thing too. So, but to the point about cover art, so I have a self-serving question, and then also it's also on behalf of the people that I'm again teaching how to make a good podcast and what all the important elements are. I learned when I was at Audible that faces are scroll stoppers. So I've imparted that wisdom to the people that I work with and for. But also, I know that, for instance, I now have a podcast and I struggle with putting my face on a piece of art. So, is there data or anything that you can share that's sort of like a universal truth? And I know there's no one size fits all, but I'm sure there's things about font size or faces or not faces. What can you share?
I think it's very common what you're experiencing about not wanting to maybe put your face on it. I think when you are working with people and working with talent, that's one of the hardest parts, is to get people to feel comfortable about the image that's going to be seen and attached to this for so long. I don't know that there's any hard and fast rule. I will say, in my other work beyond podcasting, in digital and social media and that space, the face always stops the scroll. A face does, a person does. Human to human, we see that's why our feeds are flooded with people speaking into their camera. This is why.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
we
And if
see
you think about it
people.
though, the art is a social, I'm sorry to interrupt, but the
No,
art,
it's okay.
when I think about it, art, it is the social element. It is the advertisement for the show,
Mhm.
right? So even though what you're describing is a social maxim, it also, our cover art is our, it's our way of being discovered.
It is, and then because of the
So those,
discoverability problem, you know what I mean? I think the
yeah.
discoverability, like people, like, if you want to get deep about it, people are like probably more likely to be kind when they see a human face. They're seeing it's
Mm.
less, they may be more willing to be open-minded to something when they see a person on it and they think, I'll try, I'll have a listen to that. Where maybe if it's faceless, it's easier to, that's not me, that's me speaking from, a guessing position, but I think I can see how that could be true in us, and I know there's plenty of podcasts that don't have a don't use people on the cover art, but I think if it's a personality led podcast, I think it seems important. There's also other ways to do it. There's illustrations, there's tons of ways to make it about you that isn't necessarily a photo you hate, that you're kind of like being faced with every day.
Yeah, I actually went way down the illustration rabbit hole yesterday and wasted precious time until I spoke to my teenage daughter who was like, "No, mommy, you need a photo. I will take the photo. Here's what you
Oh,
should be doing in the photo." I was like, "Oh, thank God. Thank God I have a social media expert in the family."
exactly. You have a pro.
I do. I'm glad. I'm totally going to put her to work. She doesn't yet know how much I'm going to. But before we go, I have some like rapid fires that I think are always fun to end with. What is a podcast you recommend to people who say, "I don't really listen to podcasts"?
Okay, so I have a real thing for 2018 production style. I don't know what it is. I feel like it was the glory days or something. So I love like that era in particular. There were a lot of people out there making podcasts for the love of making podcasts, a lot of like OGs. And for me, it was Bear Brook that came out in 2018, which is just a tremendously interesting true crime podcast. For me, I would say it's a great place to start because there's no way that you won't listen to the first 10 minutes and not be hooked. I think it's storytelling at its finest and investigation at its finest and imagination at its finest.
Plus one. Okay. This may be the same answer, but what is a podcast that made you think differently about what this medium could be?
Oh God, it's my favorite. I will say it every time. When I was a new mom in 2017, a podcast in Ireland came out and it was a really life-changing thing for me. It's called Mother of Pod, which was at the time like, this even the name itself was very funny, but it was women who had children who were living in the same city as I was living in, who were friends, best friends, really smart, very intelligent. One of them was a painter, one of them was a writer, and they were so irreverent about motherhood. And I was in that phase of wanting to be so perfect and wanting to do everything so right. And they talked about a French woman at the playground smoking while her kids were playing. And I
I
remember
love
this
it.
overwhelm. I was laughing. I couldn't believe how hard I was laughing. The levity that it gave me really made me think, "Oh wow, this is about something else is happening to me here. It's escapism, it's connection, and it's making me think differently about an experience that I was so vulnerable in." So I will always say, and I don't know the girls who do it. I talk about them so much so publicly they probably think I'm weird, but I do know the producer of the podcast. I got to know her probably through some level of stalking years later, but just yeah, that would be my choice.
I love that. And I'm sure they love that you love them because, as we've said, podcasting discovery is not great. So you're helping. What is your go to listen right now?
Oh, really good question. So I'm actually on the hunt for something different because I don't like self-help. And self-help is really dominating, it's kind of dominating the charts. So I don't actually have something that I'm in the midst of a series. I did get hooked on something though, and unfortunately it's left me hanging, which is Wild Boys. It's a Canadian podcast with some very strategic strategy around a paywall. So they have two episodes that they've released since January. I don't know what happened next, but if I want to know, I'm going to have to pay up. So I'm probably going to have to do that.
I haven't gone to the new season, but that's my friends at Campside. I'll have to
Oh,
nudge
do.
them, see if they can give us a little secret. We'll have a whole other conversation about monetization in podcasting, because obviously
Yes.
that's a girl's got to eat, a podcast producer's got to eat. So that's what they're
Yeah.
doing there, I'm sure. But I love Wild Boys too. It's a like recurring franchise. And I don't know if you've heard the previous ones, but you can go back while you're waiting for this one to release more episodes.
Yes.
There's the one. Yeah. Anyway.
Okay.
Offline. I will share more with you. Okay. So now I'm going to go into some fill in the blanks. All right. Here's a big one that, again, we could have a whole episode on, but AI in podcasting is fill in the blank.
Oh my God. You have no idea how many words have gone through my head. Some of them being, one of them was dangerous. Another one was helpful.
Isn't that crazy that those two words could live next to each other? Dangerous and helpful. I feel the same way.
I would say from a workflow perspective, helpful. From a content perspective, voicing perspective, I would find that a different territory. My diplomatic answer.
Okay. We have two more.
Yeah.
The biggest opportunity in podcasting is
community. I think community. That's the one for me. I think that's really the chance you get to build, whether it's small, it could be 100 people, 5,000 people, 100,000 people. That community is going to come with you on the journey, and they're going to come with you in the different places that you go and the different areas you explore. And I think community is everything when it comes to podcasting.
Okay, I had one more, but I have like chills, so I'm going to leave it at that because perfect. Thank you so much. I feel like we just scratched the surface, and I haven't even caught up with you on your real life. But I appreciate you so much, and all of the things that you have to say are so valuable. I can't wait for people to hear this. And
I'm so excited. I'm so proud of you for launching this. I think it's a really funny thing to do, right? You're talking the talk. And I know that that's thinking about the name of the pod, but actually it's really important that you can showcase, one, how truly capable you are of doing a project like this. Like, you're so meant for it. But also you're showing the people you're showing the people you're working with kind of actually what it's like in practice and giving them valuable conversations. I know you're going to have some amazing people on who are going to help them understand, and everyone's going to have a different experience with it. So I can't wait. That's going to be my pod of the week for sure.
Well, I hope so. Thank you. You're too kind. And I think one of the things I hope my audience takes away from my contributions to this is I'm also imperfect. I'm also still figuring it out, even though I've been doing this for decades. So it's okay. You just got to go with it sometimes.
Well, isn't that sort of the moment we're in when it comes to media? I think we're all shifting and changing and transitioning all the time. Nobody is smooth sailing experts in any arena right now. I think everybody is learning as they go to see where they can meet people and reach people. And I think anyone claiming otherwise, I would put a question mark around.
Thank you, Sasha. What a wonderful way to end. I will see you in other media.
Take care.
I appreciate your time. Okay, so clearly video isn't an audio killer, and it isn't even the villain of this story. But I do think trend chasing and doing things just because experts and strategists like me tell you to do something might be the real villain, especially if what we're telling you feels completely out of alignment with what you're trying to do with your podcast. What Sasha articulated so clearly is that sustainability in podcasting is highly intentional. It's knowing you have choices, knowing when to expand, and when to protect the core of what you're building. Of course, what stayed with me most was her reminder that audio is the ultimate imagination vehicle for listeners. When our eyes aren't on a screen, as they all too often are, our minds do something different. They fill in the gaps, they co-create the experience, they build worlds, and they build connection with the podcast and the podcaster. And yes, there is room at the table for audio and video together. There's room for all of us here. But what I want you to consider is, if growth pressure disappeared tomorrow, what format would you choose? Which would you choose as your primary format? And what kind of experience are you actually trying to create for your listener? I think that's a good place to start with this whole audio video debate. If this episode stirred something up for you, I want to hear about it. Drop me a note at Courtney@soundsgreatstrategy.com. And if you think I've got it completely wrong about video, I want to hear from you even more. Truly, I love a good challenge. I'm Courtney Reimer. This is Talking the Talk, a podcast about podcasting, hoping to kill pod fade. Maybe we're the real villain here. We'll see or hear you next time.